trick. How do we bring unity about, actually? Especially in the context of the modern day, in which there seems to be a motion more away from unity, away from seeing the world as one, a motion towards various kinds of tribalisms and various forms of othering, various forms of disunity. And for many, one of the root causes of disunity on the planet is precisely the thing that Baha'u'llah is bringing, a new religion. For many people, religion is the source of so much of the world's problems. And the best solution would be to simply get rid of it and try life without religion for a while. But this is where I think Baha'u'llah and the message that he brings can't be seen as business as usual in the realm of religion. It can't be seen as bringing along one more religion to sort of decide from, sort of establish one more church. And now you have one more group of people competing with others in trying to persuade people that we're in possession of the truth that everyone needs to follow. Baha'u'llah, instead of establishing one more religion to stand alongside the existing religions, instead has done something very revolutionary. He has recast the very conception of religion as the principal force impelling the development of consciousness. And that phrase, religion as the principal force impelling the development of consciousness, is what I really want to focus on in my remarks and try to expand upon a little bit. And fair warning, since you invited a cosmologist to give a talk, I'm going to have to bring in stars and planets and galaxies. It's all a part of the story. So, what's the beginning of Baha'u'llah's revolutionary perspective on religion? The way that he describes it and defines it, which puts it in a different category than how we've understood religion in the past. In the past, we may have understood a prophet as being the sole possessor of ultimate truth, which is delivered to the prophet, whispered in their ear by the angels, perhaps, and then dispensed to us in the form of sacred writing. Most of the world religions are fundamentally based around this picture of the prophet. Baha'u'llah gives us a fundamentally different view of what it's all about. He says that the divine physician has his finger upon the pulse of humanity. He perceives the sickness and prescribes in his infallible wisdom the cure. The remedy which a former age requires can never be the same as that which a latter age requires. Then he says, be anxiously concerned with the needs of the day in which you live and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. So, rather than defining himself as the ultimate arbiter of ultimate truth, he says something, I think, profoundly different. He says, I'm a physician, and I'm prescribing a remedy. And the remedy for this age is not necessarily the remedy for the ages that came before, and it's not necessarily the remedy for the ages that come after. In that sense, what he's saying is, everything I'm telling you is relative to time and place, and as he himself puts it, the exigencies of the day, the needs and requirements of the day. It's us who takes what is said by the divine revelators throughout history and crystallizes it into a receptacle of absolute truth, which then, of course, conflicts and clashes with all these other sacred writings and all these other sayings by the prophets. Because we have to admit they're not the same. On the surface, they're not saying the same thing. They're not giving us the same prescription. The social principles may differ radically. What you can eat, how many wives you can marry, and so forth. But also, the theological prescriptions which they give are very different. How many gods are there? Is it a polytheistic way of looking at the universe? Is it monotheistic? Is it agnostic? Is it non-theistic in the case of, for example, of Buddhism? And one can look at all of these theological systems, and we think, well, that's what's fundamental. If there's anything fundamental, unchanging, and true about religions, it's what they say about God. It's what they say about ultimate truth itself. But even these concepts that we have about the divine are relative to time and place. Baha'u'llah doesn't deny that there's an absolute truth out there. He denies that we have direct access to it. And therefore, everything that we can think and say and understand about that ultimate reality is confined to a particular historical context. And the context of today, and the disease of today, and therefore the remedy of today, the disease is disunity and hatred. And the remedy is love and unity. Again, it's very simple to say, but it's very difficult to put it into practice. But to understand in what way Baha'u'llah means when he says love and unity, let's take one of the statements that he made in one of his central works. In relation to the phenomenon of religion, he says, regarding his own faith, after just saying that it's all relative to time and place, it's changing, it's not the same now as it was, as it will be later. He says, apparently, precisely the opposite in his central work, in his Book of Laws. He says, this is the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past, eternal in the future. So which is it? Is it always changing according to the needs of the day? Progressive, relative? Or is it the changeless faith of God, eternal in the past? So is it changing or is it unchanging? So let's imagine, to maybe take this idea of the unchanging faith of God and to pull on this thread a little bit and ask ourselves, let's take that at face value. Let's suppose that really the religion of God has never changed. The true religion, the capital R religion of God. Let's say not the religions that we create out of the inspirations, the inspiration of the original founders. Those are the little R religions. The capital R religion is what I want to talk about. And I think this is what Baha'u'llah is saying is truly changeless. But when we look around us, the world is constantly in a state of flux, in a state of change. So what is it that's changeless? What if we go back, just sort of thought experiment, and sort of project our minds back a little bit? 5,000 years or so. And ask, that religion of God, that changeless faith of God, was still there 5,000 years ago. But now we're into an era before the existence of surviving sacred texts. We're before, any of the existing world religions. There was still the religion of God. What form did it take? Was there a prophet speaking and we've just forgotten the name of the prophet? Or the fact that humanity was divided into tribal groups scattered across several continents, which didn't have any contact with each other, made the whole concept of one universal prophet an impossible thing. So maybe this religion of God, this inspiration that we're trying to identify, what is this fundamental idea behind it? It had to have been scattered out across different tribes and different peoples. The village prophet, the shaman, the witch doctors. Today we sort of laugh at it. We sort of say, that's superstitious nonsense. But perhaps it played a role in the earlier eras of human civilization. But we can take our thought experiment back a little bit further. Let's project it back, a couple of million years. So the ancestors of modern humans were walking the earth, but they didn't have language as we have it. They couldn't even express abstract ideas the way we express them. So what form would the religion of God have taken 2 million years ago? Now there's no possibility of there being any kind of guidance or prophet, but still there has to be something, if we take this statement at face value again, that the religion of God is actually changeless. But to answer that, maybe we have to go further back. Let's go back 1 billion years. Let's go back, to a time when life was just one-celled creatures floating in the ocean. The changeless faith of God was still there. Obviously, it didn't take the form of moral principles. It didn't take the form of a theology. It took a different sort of a form. What was the form it took? And if we look back to the very dawn of time, the moment of the Big Bang, I have to mention the Big Bang. Go way back to the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago. What is the story of the overall story of the universe that's unfolded? That can be thought of as a sort of a changeless, timeless principle. And I think the answer has something to do with love and unity. But not love and unity the way we think about it, human love and unity. Love and unity in a truly cosmic sense. Love being things coming together and sticking together. In the elemental world, we're talking about primordial hydrogen coming together and forming helium. This is what happens in the hearts of the stars. This is what causes suns to shine. When Baha'u'llah said, so powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth, he was talking metaphorically, power of unity. He was also talking very possibly, quite literally. It is literally the power of unity. It's the power of the fusion of hydrogen elements in the hearts of the stars that illumines the earth physically. And we can think of this as love in a certain way. In the lowest level, love is the attraction of the elements. And the coming together of the elements for the very first moments of creation up until today and moving forward into the far reaches of the future. This coming together by love and attraction generates something that wasn't there before. There is an arrowhead, there's a directionality to motion in the universe. And the direction of things is in the direction of higher and higher, to put it in physics terms, higher and higher levels of complexity. Things come together in more and more complex configurations. At some point, these configurations are complex enough that they're able to reproduce themselves. At that point, we call it life. At some point, those living things are able to reproduce in a way that that complex enough creatures arise that they aren't just reproducing, they aren't just dividing in the ocean, but they are able to sense the environment around them. They're developing senses, eyes and ears and other senses. I mean, in the end, in the beginning, they're little, eye spots or something like that. But there's a progression of potentialities. A physicist, a biologist would describe these in purely physical terms and say, well, these are physical things. But from a Baha'i perspective, you would say these are actually spiritual potentialities. And in doing so, you would be questioning a long-held assumption about sort of how the universe is put together, which goes back hundreds, thousands of years. The idea of dualism, the idea that you have physical stuff and spiritual stuff. What I'm talking about is a way of looking at the world in which what's spiritual and what's physical is actually a matter of perspective. It's a matter of how you're looking at it, the point of view that you're looking at it from. From the point of view that I'm describing it, even the coming together of hydrogen atoms in the hearts of stars is a spiritual process because it unleashes potentials that weren't there before. And these potentials, through the process of cosmic evolution, the formation of stars, galaxies, planets, and then on this Earth, on this planet, the evolution of life itself. And by evolution, I mean evolution, the way perhaps Darwin describes it, with all of the forces at play that drive the evolution of life and matter. All of this is part of the cosmic, spiritual story of the cosmos, because what it's bringing into being is higher and higher levels of unity, higher and higher levels of complexity, and higher levels of consciousness. And this idea of emergent consciousness takes us back to the statement that I made at the beginning, which is a paraphrase by a statement by the Universal House of Justice, that Baha'u'llah didn't come to bring one more religion, rather he has recast the very conception of religion as the principal force impelling the development of consciousness. In that sense, the story of the cosmos is the story of the coming into being of awareness. And the highest level of awareness is self-awareness. In the opening sentences of one of my favorite TV shows, Carl Sagan's Cosmos, came out in the early 1980s. He says, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." He was saying this as an atheist, from a scientific perspective, but it resonates with, I think, with a certain spiritual pregnancy. The idea that the evolution of life in the universe ultimately has to do with the cosmos coming into a state of self-awareness. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. And we might add to that a hadith from the Islamic tradition that says, "He who hath known himself hath known God." So where this all leads is, the true efflorescence of self-consciousness on this planet, the highest example of which is the human reality. The furthest degree of consciousness, which is true self-awareness, has been equated with awareness of the divine. So somehow it all comes to a big circle. That there is an ultimate driving force and potentiality behind things that has to do with the emergence and generation of consciousness. The purpose of things is this emergent self-awareness, which is the same as, to put it in theological terms, knowledge of God. In other words, the cosmos has been created to know its creator. This is how Baha'u'llah puts it in one of his hidden words. He says, "Turn thy sight unto thyself, that thou mayest find me standing within thee, powerful, mighty, and self-subsisting." He also says, "I love thy creation, therefore I created thee. Wherefore do thou love me, that I may name thy name and fill thy soul with the spirit of life." So there's a kind of a circularity, a kind of, the further inward you go, the more into that transcendent outwardness you penetrate. In other words, what is ultimately transcendent outside, beyond God, and what is ultimately immanent within the deepest recesses of the human soul. The two, like arcs of a circle, reach the same point at the end. I think another reason why in the, again from the Islamic tradition, it says, "We will show them our signs upon the horizons and within their own selves." That's sort of embracing this idea of this complementarity between what's out there, furthest reaches, and what's within those furthest depths of our own consciousness. So what I'm defining and describing and presenting is the idea of there being an ultimate point to the universe, which is emergence of consciousness. And it's emerging. It wasn't there from the beginning. It's coming into being and out of being. And we have to look, again, I can't omit the existence of other stars, planets, galaxies. All of our thinking about these things is very much confined to this planet. I mean, it would be a bit self-centered of us to imagine with trillions of other planets and galaxies elsewhere in the universe, that similar processes haven't taken place, that life and consciousness has not emerged elsewhere. At this point, it's purely the stuff of science fiction. But at some point in the future, it may become science fact. And what an interesting world we'll live in when we're able to communicate with other intelligent life, with other conscious intelligence, and learn the story of their ascent to these higher degrees of consciousness. But again, coming back to the fact that we're discussing something which is like a narrative of progress. And we're progressing towards something because, and the progress towards this something, this ultimate consciousness that we're reaching towards, this knowledge of the divine that humanity is progressing towards, is sort of like in mathematics, you call it an asymptote. You know, it's getting close to that line, but it never actually touches that line. Because that ultimate reality is ineffable and untouchable, inexpressible, and unreachable. The best we can do with our understandings of it is to approximate it in varying, more or less crude ways. All our approximations of reality, all our ways of modeling reality are ultimately just that, they're models. Both in the scientific world, in the realm of physics, all of the theories of the physicists are simply models for describing phenomena. And there's always a deeper model. At some point, it breaks down and we're looking for something deeper. It's like a set of Russian dolls. You think you've got it, but then inside, you crack open the doll and there's always one more inside. Almost as though it's infinitely, that the complexity runs infinitely deeply. Likewise, the religious systems of the human race are models of reality. We could call them sacred narratives. And they involve their own stories. They involve their own ways of imagining reality, which we know in the end are not 100% correct ways of describing things. But, as Baha'u'llah says, as their remedies, it's not their purpose to be true in the sense of fully correct mappings onto reality. It's not their purpose. The purpose of a religion is to serve as a remedy for the illness of the day. And along with that comes our natural desire to sort of frame that as a model, to turn it into a theology, to crystallize it into absolute truth. But in doing so, we always run the danger of dividing one group from another group. The danger of all theologies is that it creates a sense of privileged possession of truth, of which others are deprived. And Baha'u'llah, in giving this new spin, this new way of understanding the fundamental reality of religion, has undercut that tendency that we have of giving ourselves a privileged position in relationship to the truth. So not only then are these narratives that we have approximate narratives, not only are we only building models that try to represent this reality in better and better terms, but our progress towards reality is not always continuous. And this is the last sort of major idea I want to introduce. Baha'u'llah quotes one of the most ancient philosophers that the Western world has memory of, Hermes, and one of the great sort of most famous statements of Hermes is that which is above is like that which is below. A statement of the correspondence of the microcosm to the macrocosm. Sort of a statement of universal principle that whatever is small will typically be replicated at larger scales. Today we call those fractals. We even have a mathematical theory for how that is manifested in some way, in some aspects of nature. But one way in which this fractal sense of the universe is encoded in the Baha'i perspective of humanity's spiritual progress is that the progress of humanity collectively is seen as emblematic of the progress of a single individual. In other words, we can look at humanity as passing through similar stages as an individual does. Infancy, childhood, adolescence, maturity. And although one is growing every day in a sort of continuous sense, when you sort of step back a bit, you zoom out and you look at the progress of life, in an individual, there are certain stages in which the transitions are more abrupt, sometimes more violent or fraught or difficult. And in the human in the human world, in human life, the most difficult transition perhaps is that through adolescence into maturity. And this process of the transition from adolescence into maturity is what what humanity has been passing through for some time now. And Baha'is believe that we're on the threshold of that maturity. And we'd like to call that state of maturity, once it's attained, we don't know exactly when, but we believe we're inexorably on our way towards it. We call that the golden age. That's when we've finally grown up. That's when we're no longer doing childish things and saying childish things. This process of growing up, this sort of the first stirrings of our collective adolescence, one difficult to pinpoint. Let me just throw a dart on the wall and suggest that the sort of a good historical starting point to mark this emerging adolescence, the sort of entry into adolescence of the human race, which is a spiritual process as well as a physical process, happened actually a few hundred years ago. We call it the scientific revolution. Again, I'm saying this as through the eyes of a scientist, so I tend to see things through that lens. But bear with me for a moment as I suggest that our emergence sort of from the stage of childhood and infancy to the stage of adolescence really began with the scientific revolution, and more particularly with the Enlightenment of the late 16th and early 17th century. And I don't want to turn this into a lecture on the Enlightenment, but I do want to mention one of the key changes in civilization that happened with the Enlightenment, one of the changes in the way we perceive things. And this came on the heels of the scientific revolution and Galileo's examination through a telescope for the first time of the spots on the sun and the craters on the moon and the moons orbiting Jupiter and the rings of Saturn. And what he saw and what he concluded from these observations overturned the accepted authorities of the time. It overturned the authorities, both secular and religious authorities. It was the authority of the Greek astronomers, of Ptolemy and others. It was the authority of the Bible and the clergy of the day, which had concluded that the universe is this way, not that way. That the Earth doesn't move around the sun, but that the sun moves around the Earth. Of course, because the Earth has to be the center of the universe, because we're the center of the universe, because we were created especially by God. There's a logic to that. But Galileo found, he said, look, my reference point for reality is not authority. It's not what someone said centuries or thousands of years ago. He said, my reference point for authority is what is before my own eyes. My reference point for authority is reality itself. That was the first, we can look back now sort of in hindsight and see this is what was going on. This was an earthquake. Of course, not just an earthquake in astronomy, but this was the beginning of what we're now going through, a global transition in human consciousness. And it began with astronomy, with Galileo's observations, but it rapidly progressed to every other walk of human life. People started questioning all sorts of other things. Well, if Galen and Hippocrates said this about the human body, or Aristotle said this about the number of teeth, let's actually count them and say, well, this is how many teeth men and women have versus, Aristotle actually said that women have fewer teeth than men. And this went on for a couple of thousand years because people didn't think to check. But this was kind of one of the things that came as a result of the scientific revolution. People started saying, well, instead of reading these old musty books, let's actually look at the universe and let the universe tell us how it is. And again, it started with science and astronomy and medicine, and then it moved into more dangerous territory. It moved into politics. Well, the divine right of kings. Maybe the ruler doesn't just get to be ruler because his father was and his father's father all the way back to this illustrious line of kings. Maybe, we can have a say in how to govern ourselves instead of just taking it as given that there are certain authorities that are over us. And of course, this led to revolutions, political revolutions, as well as scientific revolutions. One of the last bastions of the old way of thinking, of appealing for authority and truth to the past rather than the present and the future. One of those last bastions of thought is still religious thinking. It's kind of the last domino to fall, I think. Traditional religious thinking is still very much identifies the ultimate source of truth with something that happened in the past. And this is again where Baha'u'llah's message, I think, is a fundamentally revolutionary idea. It's meant to spark a spiritual renaissance. And I use the word renaissance very, very carefully, in the same sense that the Renaissance sparked the scientific revolution, which brought about the Enlightenment, and this centuries-long cascade of revolutions in human thought, of which, let me propose, the Baha'i faith is a piece of, a part of. It's a part of this process of the emergence of the human race from childhood into adolescence. And with that comes a new way of looking at reality. And to frame it in the spiritual terms or the theological terms of the Baha'i faith, what that entails is no longer defining religion as a fixed set of doctrines, but rather defining religion as the essential relationships that proceed from the realities of things. Relationships that we examine, that we... the litmus test of the truth of a religion, then, is not what our parents believed or what it says in a certain book, as much as we may reverence it for what it has done for humanity. The sacred scriptures of the past are embraced and revered in the Baha'i tradition. They're not just cast aside. But the way we think about reality is fundamentally changed. We're now asking, our litmus test of truth is not some arbitrary authority, but it is now reality itself. What is the fruit of this? If it's true, it needs to produce fruit. As Jesus said in the Bible, when asked, how do we tell the true prophets from the false? And he says, by their fruits ye shall know them. That's the standard that Baha'u'llah is calling humanity to in investigating his message. He's saying, I'm making these claims about human unity. I'm making these claims about how the universe kind of fundamentally works. It's up to you to investigate this claim. And don't take it on authority, saying, well, I'm a prophet, therefore, it's... Don't take it on that basis. Investigate it for yourself and determine. Apply it in your own life and see how it's being applied in the life of humanity. And that brings us, I guess, basically to the end, but to the present day, which is, the litmus test of the truth, I think, of Baha'u'llah's revolutionizing claims about the nature of religion and where this is all coming from and where this is all going, is by looking at the Baha'i community today, saying, what sort of a community is this? If the message is unity, is it really representing all of humanity? Or is it just a few people here and there that are making themselves look bigger by spreading around the world? But really, it's the same group of people. Or is this a very diverse group of people from all walks of life, from all racial, ethnic, religious, socioeconomic backgrounds? And are they all sort of working together to bring about this golden age, which ultimately is inevitable? It's coming whether we like it or not. We're going to grow up whether we like it or not. It's a question of how much pain do we have to go through before we get there. In 1987, the House of Justice produced a message called the Promise of World Peace. And they opened that by saying, just flat out, saying world peace is inevitable. Whether it is attained through a collective act of will or whether it is attained through unimaginable suffering, that's the choice that lies before us. And the worldwide Baha'i community today is I think a living proof of the reality of what Baha'u'llah said. This gathering that we're attending tonight is just one of hundreds, probably thousands of gatherings taking place around the planet, in villages, cities, towns, specially erected houses of worship on various continents. There's actually a beautiful website. Maybe Mary has or maybe the link is somewhere in the material in the back table. There's a website commemorating this centenary, and one of the pages in the website opens onto sort of live feed of celebrations around the world, and you can sort of go from Chile to New Delhi to Western Samoa to Frankfurt, Germany, and watch these wonderful celebrations as they're taking place around the world. So I'll leave you with that thought and that idea is to sort of chase down this website and see what's going on around the world as this incredibly diverse community works towards this incredibly ambitious but inevitable goal. Thank you.
Stephen has given us permission to ask him questions. So if you have a burning question about something that he brought up that you'd like to ask now, this would be a good time to do it. Yes, sir, please.
I appreciate your talk. It really was very good meeting together of a lot of the things that are going on in our civilization. But I have various questions. Let me ask, since you're a cosmologist, let me ask you one that I have been asked in my career as a physicist. What do you think of the Higgs boson?
And tell us what that is.
Which has been described in the past after they were unable to raise enough funds to find it, has been called the God boson, the God particle. Obviously, to my great disapproval. Put it mildly.
The Higgs what now?
Higgs boson.
The Higgs boson. This is probably the only two people in the room.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit of I have a quick answer. I think the Higgs boson is the last piece in the standard model of particle physics, which is a picture uniting three of the four fundamental forces of nature: electricity, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. And for decades, it's been thought that this particle has to exist to explain how all the other particles get their mass. And so the search was on for this particle for decades, and it was finally discovered. And just a few years ago. The discovery, of course, didn't revolutionize anything because the theory had been worked out decades before. It was just a matter of saying, well, what is the exact mass of it? And it turned out that the mass of it didn't answer any questions. It didn't solve anything. It just led to a sense of actual profound disappointment. Because what the physicists really wanted was either not to find it, which would have been interesting, or to find it at some wildly different mass, some wildly different energy, which is the same thing, which also would have been interesting. Instead, they read, and the editor said, no, this probably isn't going to fly with the public, so it got shortened to the God particle.
I think that was just to raise funds. To find it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It absolutely sort of rallies everyone around this idea, well, maybe there's deep theological truths to be unveiled by the good. No. Were there any other questions or reactions to this attempt to overturn all of Western religious thought of the last century?
Nicely tied together. I really enjoyed it. Really nicely tied together.
Maybe we should.
Sorry. So you were talking about all these changes that are going to happen, but if you look at the world now, it just looks, people just say, no way.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
So how does that fit together?
Well, you would say the same thing looking at the bud on an apple tree and never having seen an apple before. Someone comes and says, you know what, that thing's going to turn into this delicious, juicy, sweet apple in a few months. And you'd be like, well, I don't see anything there. It's a bud.
Okay.
But that's the nature of an organic process. I mean, you have to have, and that's where you have to have the vision and the faith. That's where really faith comes in. You read these writings. You are transfixed by these ideas. You're transformed by them, and you have a vision of what this all means and what you're working towards. And you don't know exactly what it is. So the Baha'i community doesn't know exactly what it's bringing into the world. It has some idea that has something to do with love and unity and consultation, and there's a few things that we think are going to be the fundamental pillars of this human golden age of civilization to come. But no one knows. No one can say whether it's going to be, more sort of, is it going to be like laissez-faire capitalism, or is it going to be more socialist, or is it going to be... No one knows in terms of existing categories of economic categories, political categories. Who knows? And it may be that this future state will be such that if someone were to come from the future and describe it to us now, we might say, oh, no, that's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Because it will be based upon different assumptions about human nature. Right now, we can only build political and economic systems around the premise of the selfishness of the individual. You have to assume that people are fundamentally out for their own best interests. And our politics, our economics all circles around those assumptions. And it can't be otherwise. It's not like we could have designed it, that there's some, maybe there's a more brilliant way of thinking about designing, a more perfect union than the United States did, a couple hundred years ago, or other countries in the world. But they all would have suffered from this fundamental limitation of the exigencies of the day, the state of human consciousness over the last few centuries, and the assumptions that have to go into the kinds of systems that are possible. But if what we're talking about is a transformation of consciousness, a deep and lasting spiritual renaissance, where now we can make a different assumption. Instead of assuming that the average person is going to be selfish, okay, there's always going to be selfish people, and we're not talking so utopian that it's not possible. We're talking about human reality being like a distribution, and we're moving the curve over. To use statistical terms, we're bumping it over 1 or 2 sigma, And when you bump that curve over, so the median of that curve is 1 or 2 sigma over, you're in a different regime. You're in a different realm. Different kinds of solutions may now be possible that weren't before, and we can't even imagine what they are. Because it will be based on trust at a level that we cannot base things on right now. But, if you talk about, moving things forward by a few centuries, and the time scales that we're talking about, the Baha'i community is not trying to change the world overnight. We're talking about educating our junior youth and our children and our youth for the next generation, and then they educate the next generation, and we're talking about many generations before we see the needle start to move, let alone large-scale transformations in society. Maybe it'll happen more quickly than we think. Maybe it takes off and just becomes a runaway phenomenon. But I think we should prepare for the long haul. We should prepare for centuries of difficult work, because it took us centuries and millennia to get to where we are. It's going to take us centuries to get us, out some other way of looking at the world. But that other way of looking at the world may be so radically different than, that our categories. We think of, what about church and state? This is kind of a big one in the Baha'i community. Well, is church and state still going to be separated in the future? Are they going to merge or not? To talk about merging a church and state is a little bit scary and a little bit dangerous. And because you look at all the religions today and you imagine, if any one of those religions sort of got control of the state, things would not go well. But the future we're talking about is a future in which these categories will be fundamentally redefined. If we really are redefining the concept of religion, the concept of church, which is no longer an us versus them sort of definition, which is no longer one church among many, and now in lifting up one, you have to exclude the others. If we're thinking about it differently than that, then we can think about the possibility of a spiritualization of a political process in a way that is not sectarian. But again, if you were to ask, exactly how are you going to do that? Well, this depends on the spiritual renaissance that has to come into being. This depends on the great transformation which is to come.
For the less patient of us, and can you, without betraying any competency, speak to your insights of the writings and the writings that haven't been revealed and what you've seen at the World Center that gives you inspiration that you can broadly share with us?
Oh, God. That's such an unfair question. Behind that question is the fact that something around 5 to 10% of Baha'u'llah's writings have been translated into English. Now, the numbers are lies. You say they're lies and damned lies and statistics. This is a statistic that's way to the other end because it doesn't tell... That 5 to 10% that's translated is not representative. It's the most important 5 to 10%. There's 85, 90%, 95% left to translate. A lot of this is going to be personal guidance. A lot of it is going to be, acknowledging receipt of gifts and things like that. Prayers, tens of thousands of prayers. They're all beautiful. They're all like snowflakes, but they're all water in the end. You melt them down. It's the same substance, the same life-giving substance. But that being said, yes, there are and will be things coming out. I think in the near future, definitely in the near future, that are going to, I think, propel the Baha'i community quite a bit further forward in its understanding of certain elements of Baha'u'llah's thinking. The one that's coming out most immediately, and I hope you turned off the video camera.
Oh yeah.
But most immediately is a new volume of Baha'u'llah's mystical writings, which will include retranslations of his principal mystical works, the Seven Valleys and what we call the Four Valleys, but with additional materials besides. And these additional materials, I think, will force us to look at the concept of spiritual journey in different terms. If you just read Baha'u'llah's Seven Valleys, it sounds like there's a sequence of 7 stages that the seeker goes through, from search through knowledge of love and unity, and to annihilation, to utter self-effacement, utter self-effacement, true poverty and absolute nothingness. But when you look at these other works of Baha'u'llah wrote, it forces you out of that whole frame of reference. He talks about approaches to spirituality which are stageless, and he talks about other stages which aren't in this set in the Seven Valleys. And sometimes more and sometimes less, in different orders, and so just that idea of how is it that human individual spiritual progress takes place? There's rich materials that are, let's say, on the threshold of being introduced to the world. Certainly during this unique 2-year period in Gladstone, the House of Justice is interested in putting out some significant new materials. And they're very exciting.
Thank you. I hope I didn't.
Yeah, we might be out of time.
You know, we're getting
Okay.
that point.
Maybe one more question.
Yeah,
And
let's take one more.
then afterwards, you can always come up to me. Yeah.
You can drop him in the corner.
Okay, I wondered if you talked to, let me back up a little bit. You talk about the long haul, okay? On the other hand, there seem to be radical changes that happen overnight. And I wonder if you could talk to those two processes. I know The Guardian talked about them, and the House of Justice, when they meet with pilgrims, talks about how they make decisions. Sometimes it's instantaneous, and sometimes it's a slog to get to the results.
Yes.
And I think that's true. And I haven't found any of the writings where it really talks about this yet, but there's probably going to be a place. But the same thing, I think, holds true of change in our societies. Who would have thought that the fall of the Soviet Empire would have happened as quickly as it did and as painlessly, so to speak, as it did?
That's a great example.
Or who would have thought that one Hollywood mogul who abused women would cause this Me Too thing to happen, which really has raised awareness almost overnight to the problem.
I may have been insufficiently optimistic in emphasizing the long-term nature of all of this. And there are certainly, and those are two good examples of triggering events. And those are relatively painless ones in the scheme of things. I mean, one can only imagine the sort of triggering event that would happen if, say, a nuclear weapon were used today, by some state or other, or a non-state actor. Overnight, the conversations would suddenly change. And we don't know what's coming. And we can't plan for it. So we have to kind of plan for the long haul, plan for things sort of gradually changing. But knowing that it's the nature of, life in the universe. I mean, again, from an astrophysics perspective, a meteor could fall on the planet, as has happened over the centuries and millennia in the past, and completely upend the ecosystem. Something like that could happen, and then suddenly human civilization is changed permanently. We can't really speculate on it. We can't really plan on it. So we just have to plan for the long haul. So, thank you.
I know you've been sitting a long time, and I want you to sit just a little bit longer. And then please feel free to partake of the goodies over here and visit a little bit. But before we do this last number, in fact, if you'll look at your program, there are some words to the chorus to a song that Annie wrote that we want to do to kind of end things. But before we do, I want you to direct your attention to three panels that are in the back of the room. And picking up where Stephen wants to talk about love, unity, and the building of a new system, where do you start? Right now, Baha'i communities worldwide are engaged in several activities to start rebuilding civilization. One of those activities is having devotional meetings. Devotional meetings spring up naturally in communities where a conversation about the spiritual dimension of human existence is growing. In diverse settings, Baha'is and their friends and families unite with one another in prayer. There are no rituals. No one individual has any special role. Meetings consist largely of reading prayers and passages from the Baha'i sacred texts in an informal yet respectful atmosphere. A spirit of communal worship generated by these simple gatherings, and this spirit begins to permeate the community's collective endeavors. Also, you will see children's classes. We know that the children are our most precious treasure. In them are the promise and guarantee of the future. Yet in order for that promise to be realized, children need to receive spiritual nourishment. In a world where joy and innocence of childhood can be so easily overwhelmed by the aggressive pursuit of materialistic ends, the moral and spiritual education of children assumes vital importance. And lastly, the collection of human resources to accomplish these tasks. In 1990, the Universal House of Justice created the Training Institute. And Baha'is avail themselves of the Training Institute by participating in study circles that help equip them with the information and skills to deepen their understanding of the Baha'i teachings, gain spiritual insights, and practical skills they need to carry out the work in their community. So if you will, take time, look at those. Annie's going to give you the... Say what? Did I forget? We won't forget them, no. No, they're there as well. My grandchild, our grandchild, is now in Africa, serving in a school. My son went to Haifa to serve for a year. My daughter served. So there's training available for youth, as well as the work that they do with the younger population, training available to them, and service opportunities to help them grow and mature spiritually and intellectually. So with all of our bases covered. So if you see parts of those processes or any of those processes that you want to get involved, there are 3 ladies in this room right now that could give you information. In fact, Mary 1, Mary 2, Sandy's over here. Grab one of these ladies and get information, contact information about how to get involved with one of those activities so that you can actually start working on a community level to bring about the kind of change that we know is inevitable with less pain.
For the long haul.
Yeah, for the long haul.
I don't know.
Yes, no.
Okay, so on the back of your programs, there is the chorus of the song that you get to sing with us. Pardon me? On the bottom. On the bottom of the program. Right, got it. There it is. Okay. Okay, so...
Peace in my heart, peace in my home, peace in my land, peace on earth, paz en mi corazón, paz en mi hogar, paz en mi patria, paz mundial, paix dans mon cœur, paix dans ma maison, paix dans ma pays, paix dans le terre. Peace, I dream of peace, I hope for peace, peace on earth, peace, I long for peace, I pray for peace, peace on earth, peace in my heart, peace in my home, peace
Help yourself, please.
Let's get some water.